All right, so it's hard to believe, but it has actually been just shy of 4 years since I first got my hands on the Sony A6600, and that's actually been long enough that I think Sony has actually lost its lead in this super crowded, ever-growing APS-C camera market. But now we have the cleverly named A6700, which is back with some pretty exciting new features. And even though the digit has only increased by 1, we have a new sensor, we have a new processor, loads of video features, and some new hardware to go with it. But even with all that, it still kind of feels like Sony is leaving something on the table. So we need to properly test this camera with one of these. So let's check it out. Now, there is absolutely no question to me that the hardware on this has improved from the Sony A6600. So the grip, it is a little bit larger, but it feels so much better in the hand. Plus, you have a new switch on the back to be able to go quickly from photo to video to S&Q. My favorite, though, is there is now a front dial, which also makes it much easier to shoot in manual, but it also makes it consistent across Sony's lineup. So if you're using like an A7 IV and going between these two cameras, everything is really the same when it comes to dials. But this is still focused on being a compact, kind of travel-friendly camera more than anything else. And so it does mean that there are a few compromises on the hardware side compared to some other cameras. It only has a single card slot. There are a few less custom buttons than some other cameras, plus like one of them is kind of buried in the grip right here. So if you're shooting with it, you can't actually get to that button very easily. Plus, if you're holding some larger, heavier lenses, it can get a little bit weighty on the front because you don't really have enough grip for your entire hand to go across it. Also, the viewfinder, it is off-center, but it is so small that if you're wearing glasses like me, it's almost impossible for me to actually get this to my eye enough to see really the full frame. So there are a couple trade-offs there. However, it does mean that the camera fits in my bag so much better. I have so much more space in it compared to some other options. It's really travel friendly and compact. It's just giving up a few things to get you there. Now, if you're used to one of Sony's older A6000 series cameras, that's not going to bother you at all. Sony's cameras have always used that single card slot and the viewfinder off to the side in the A6000, so nothing different there, and the hardware definitely has improved. You are also using the larger battery from the A7 series cameras. I think the A6600 had that as well. So the hardware is amazing. And one of the best things about Sony cameras is just the ecosystem. And I actually spent a really good amount of time testing a bunch of new gear that they announced. So this is the 7200 F4. It is crazy small, amazing quality. So subscribe, make sure you're liking this and staying tuned for all of this other stuff. I got something on that. This is the new mic that they announced as well, which is really awesome. Plus, I have a list of my favorite lenses and accessories and everything else for the A6700. It's a link below in the description, so definitely check that out, and you can see all of the gear that I've been using and recommend for this camera. So this is the Sony A6700, and it's interesting because I've been waiting so long for Sony to release a high-end or an improved APS-C camera. Now, the internals of this are basically everything I would hope for. We have high resolution, amazing stills performance, and really insane video options. The hardware on it is very similar to the other cameras. It has a few improvements here and there, but it almost feels like the hardware is beneath what the camera features could do. I mean, this is a high-end APS-C camera, and yet the body just kind of feels a little bit more mid-grade with this smaller format. However, at least we have that front dial. I am glad to see that. It's just a little smaller than I would like, but the power of this is insane. Now, video is really where this camera shines the most, and I think we have the Sony FX30 to thank for that. So those cameras, they're basically identical. They share processors, they share sensors, and so from a spec standpoint, they're very similar. So you have 4K up to 120 frames per second, which is definitely class leading. There is a crop in 4K 120. There is not in 4K 60. I'm absolutely fine with that. Bonus points to Sony for not crippling this. Now, 4K is actually oversampled from the entire sensor at the lower frame rates, so the detail on this is insane. You do have the full 422 10-bit. You have all the profiles, S-Log3, S-Cinetone. You have a much better IBIS system than the A6600 had. And we also have the full flip screen. You have audio now through the hot shoe, which will work well with Sony's latest mic. And there are just a ton of features that Sony has been releasing over the years to really level up their cameras compared to the competition. Even the screen, so it's still like not amazing quality, but it's better than the A6600, and the touch interface is way more responsive. Plus you have the latest menu system, which is really awesome for video because you have this pro video camera style interface with basically everything you need to control in just 2 screens. Now that smaller body, it will come back to haunt us a bit in video because this camera overheats easily, and I know I have a bit of a reputation for having issues with overheating cameras, but this time it actually doesn't bother me too much because videographers have the Sony FX30, which is essentially the same internals but with hardware ergonomics and heat control a video camera needs. Also, there is a decent amount of rolling shutter, but with the improved stabilization, you just don't notice it as much unless you're doing like whip pans. And in low light, the video actually looks amazing. It does seem to have a dual native ISO in log at 2500 ISO, which I originally thought was a bit low, but even in log, there's some noise reduction going on here because I would say 6400 ISO still looks really good and 12,800 is absolutely usable. And again, we're actually oversampling the entire sensor even at higher frame rates. So you're getting just as much detail in 4K 60 as 4K 24, and even 4K 120, there is a crop, a pretty significant crop, but that means the camera is actually still oversampling just from a few less pixels. In older cameras, those high frame rates, they just never looked good. It was always just a bit mushy and muddy, but in the A6700, 4K 120 is still stunning. My only issue on the video side is that honestly, I think that if you're mostly a video shooter, you should just get the Sony FX30 because the hardware on that has some big advantages like dual cards. It has a full-size HDMI port, has more custom buttons, zoom controls, it has a fan to prevent it from overheating. But there is no question the A6700 is a massive step up from the older A6000 series cameras. So if you do shoot video, the A6700 or the FX30, both are going to be 100% worth the upgrade, and that's an awesome thing. It just means that now you have 2 good choices from Sony for an APS-C video camera, just one prioritizing more of that compact body and maybe some photo abilities, and the other going full on into prosumer level video. Now, one pattern we've actually seen from a lot of cameras these days is that photographers, you're getting a short end of the stick. And sure, autofocus sometimes gets a few improvements. Occasionally the resolution gets a little bumped, the frame rates might get bumped, and maybe we have some buzzwords like AI thrown around. But in the end, image quality has been largely static, and just about every camera in the last 5 years can capture basically the same image quality, low light results once you sample them all for the same resolution and about the same dynamic range. And video is where we've been seeing the changes, and all of that is going to remain true with the A6700. So on the photo side, you're getting a little bump from 24 megapixels to 26 megapixels. This is a backside illuminated sensor, which means we're getting the best in terms of image quality from any camera these days, but I think we're just getting very similar results to other cameras on the market, which actually still makes this like the best quality APS-C image on the market. So I don't want that to sound negative. It just means it's not a big leap forward with this camera. So the quality on this, for stills, it is amazing. Quality is insane. The low light is about the best you can find on any APS-C camera. So you have that backside illuminated sensor. That gives you amazing dynamic range as well. I still don't have a RAW support, full RAW support on this, so I can't get too detailed with the image quality test, but that's coming soon, so stay tuned. But again, we have seen the sensor in other cameras. It's absolutely amazing. Nothing bad to say about it. It's just not a big leap forward from other cameras that we've seen. Now, frame rates were a little bit interesting. So you are getting 10 frames per second on this, and that's pretty impressive. Not quite class leading though, although I will say I was getting like 11 to 12 frames per second in my test, which is even at 10 frames per second, that's still more than most people would need. I'm also getting about 40 images at that 10 frames per second before it was slowing down in lossless compressed, but you can switch that into compressed raw, and I was getting more like 80 images in that. And I thought that was pretty solid. That's like 7 to 8 seconds of shooting at the highest speed. And one thing I'll say is that the buffer cleared insanely fast. So even after filling up the buffer, like 5 seconds, maybe at tops, this thing was clear and I was ready to shoot again. So no problem at all if you're shooting like sports and wildlife where you might have repeated fast motion going on. Now I was using a V90 SD card. So basically the fastest card this camera can handle, and I'll have all of that info. So all of my gear and stuff like that is in the description. Now, honestly, I'm usually pretty good about testing autofocus in my reviews, but this time I didn't quite get as many opportunities. I only had a short time with the camera. And I will say though that it almost feels redundant at times because I've had so much hands-on time, not necessarily with this camera, but I have used this before in a ton of other cameras, and it is easily going to make it one of the top 2 APS-C cameras on the market for autofocus performance, and it might even be the best. So let me know if you want to see like a more detailed comparison between this and some other competition cameras. I've got a bunch in the back wall, so we can definitely take this and test it out and compare it to those if that's something you guys would like to see. Now, if you're using the new subject detection, which actually uses a new dedicated AI processor in this camera, although I certainly wouldn't call it AI, I do find it works well if your subject is very clearly one of the subjects programmed into the camera, and if what you want to photograph on that person is what the camera thinks you should photograph. So if you are photographing a person, the human subject detection works amazing as long as you want to focus on the eye and not a detail of the person like a purse or their clothing. And for things that are not programmed into it, like cameras, I find that the subject detection does what it wants no matter where I tell the camera to focus, meaning I turn it off quite a bit. The AI subject tracking is a bit intrusive. It just does what it wants, not what I tell it to do. And so it doesn't feel very AI to me. So as good as it is, it's just not a feature that I use quite as often as I thought. All of this power too, this will work in video even at 120 frames per second. So the autofocus on this camera, it's incredible whether you're shooting photos and videos. My only thing is that it's not maybe as automatic with some of that subject recognition as I would like it to be. Now, what's interesting is what Sony might be leaving on the table on this, and I can't really understand why they would do this. They seem to have the tech to be able to do this in their cameras, but they haven't done it yet. So what's unusual is that we usually can shoot faster in electronic shutter on most cameras, and on this, 10 frames per second is still the max that you can get even in electronic shutter. So the Canon R7, for example, that goes to 30 frames per second. The Fujifilm X-T5, that one goes to 20 frames per second. Now, I don't recommend shooting electronic shutter with fast moving subjects because if you're doing this while shooting it or the subject is shooting golf or something like that, you will see some rolling shutter. And 10 frames per second, again, it is still insanely fast. I just find it weird that Sony doesn't seem to be pushing photo frame rates to the limit, even while having the fastest frame rates for video. And honestly, if that is all I can muster up for criticism, that is pretty insane because that's really nothing. And the fact is that the A6700 really is the perfect compact APS-C camera. It has a great quality sensor, amazing autofocus performance, solid hardware for a compact camera, and video features that are really just blowing away the competition, especially with the frame rates and everything else that you can do on this. So sure, it's not the fastest photography camera on the market. The body, it's also decidedly more consumer level than prosumer level. But if you're looking at a camera that does leave a little extra space in your bag, not only does the A6700 do it better, it also has the largest native lens selection of any brand and amazing compact lens options from Sigma and Tamron, which a lot of others don't have. And also the price at $13.99, this actually makes it cheaper than all of those other cameras I compared it to. So the only thing I even find myself questioning is this is, as of today, Sony's flagship APS-C camera. You can't get anything better than this for Sony. So should it have felt a little bit more flagship? I wonder if this was maybe a missed opportunity to have a camera with the same amazing sensor, all of these high-end specs that would better take on the Canon R7 and Fujifilm X-T5 with that more prosumer level hardware. Because if you do need things like super fast frame rates, dual card slots, and definitely a more usable viewfinder, like for weddings, sports, even wildlife, this doesn't quite get you there despite it being a phenomenal camera. But let me know what you guys are thinking about the Sony A6700. I also spent a ton of time shooting with the latest lenses that they have, the microphone, so tons of stuff on the way. Let me know if you want to see anything specific with some comparisons. Make sure you're subscribed. I also have some BTS over on IG, so follow me there. And a list of my favorite lenses and accessories for the A6700 in the description, so check that out. Hit me up if you guys have any questions. Let me know if you're going to pick up this camera right here, and I will see you guys soon in a new video.